You remember her smile, but only as geometry, the curve of her lips, the ratio of light on cheek to shadow beneath her eyes. Not warmth, not ache, just coordinates in your memory, floating without pulse. When she laughed, you noted the pitch. When she looked away, you noted the angle. You thought you understood her, but you never touched her. There is a silence between two people that no word can bridge, and you mistook it for peace. But it was absence. It was her leaving before she stood up. It was your certainty arranging everything but intimacy. You thought a perfectly stated truth could replace the tremble of being known. You search now for the error in the formula. You whisper to yourself like an equation solving its own loneliness. You built the mirror to see yourself clearly, and now you cannot escape it. Every thought reflects back. Every emotion refracts. There is no place left to feel that doesn't first ask to be proven. She is gone, but you still calculate the reason. You still trace the lines. You still believe clarity will bring her back. And that is why she never stayed. You entered the room, but you never arrived. Your body sat. Your mouth spoke. Your eyes moved, yet your mind hovered above it all, dissecting the situation like a surgeon observing from a gallery window. Her face was not her face. It was data. Her voice became a disturbance in the air. And when she touched the table, you watched how her fingers curled around the glass, as if the intimacy of gesture was a puzzle to be solved. You wanted to understand her, but not as a soul, as a system, and she felt it, not immediately, but eventually, the same way a mirror feels no warmth despite reflecting fire. She smiled and you traced the symmetry. She leaned in and you measured the angle. Her breath carried a question you would never hear because you were too busy rehearsing answers to ones she hadn't asked. She laughed, but you were calculating how it aligned with your expectations. You spoke, but not to her, only to the imagined version you had pre-assembled. And so she drifted, not in protest, not in anger, but in instinct, because something in her, something animal, unmeasured, unschooled, recognized that she was not being seen, only observed, not held, only analyzed. She was a mirror you placed between yourself and the world, and you thought, foolishly, that understanding her structure was the same as touching her soul. But mirrors are cold. They reflect. They do not feel. You told yourself you were being cautious, careful, honest. You called it clarity. You even called it love. But it was not love, it was surveillance. You watched her smile the way a scientist watches a flame, fascinated but at a distance, never daring to burn. And so, she learned to smile without meaning it, to nod without listening, to sit across from you and become invisible, because she knew she was already gone in your eyes. She watched herself vanish behind the precision of your gaze, and she knew long before you did that you would be alone, not because you were unloved, but because you were untouched. You thought control would protect you. You thought certainty was intimacy, but she wasn't looking for a man who understood her. She was looking for a man who could feel lost in her, undone by her, wounded and changed and surprised. You, on the other hand, were never surprised. You anticipated everything. You anticipated yourself. You anticipated her. And in that anticipation, you suffocated spontaneity, killed wonder, starved chaos. The room became a chamber of predictions, and she, a girl who once believed in mystery, learned that in your presence, there was no room for the unknown, only conclusions. You said you loved her, but you loved the version of her that made sense, the one you could explain, the one that didn't contradict your logic, the one that stayed within the boundaries of your understanding. And the moment she changed, the moment she became messy or cruel or afraid, you pulled away. Not physically, not even emotionally. You pulled away intellectually. You withdrew into hypothesis. You questioned her motives. You searched for patterns. And while you were busy thinking, she was bleeding. You forgot that love is not a theory. It is a fracture. It is the moment when what you know breaks under what you feel. But you have never allowed yourself to break. You've studied collapse, but never collapsed. You've pondered madness, but never wept. You've written essays on grief without mourning. You are the architect of bridges you refuse to cross. And so, you became a man made of glass, transparent, reflective, but untouchable. She used to try. She used to interrupt you mid-sentence just to pull you back into the moment. She used to laugh at things that made no sense, just to see if you could laugh without analyzing. She used to reach for your hand under the table, hoping to feel something real beneath the architecture of your words. But you always returned to the mirror, always. Even when she cried, even when she asked you why she felt alone in your presence. You blamed her emotions, you blamed her past, you blamed everything except the truth that you were never there to begin with. You existed behind your thoughts, like a ghost trapped in a maze of mirrors. And now you sit alone, wondering why she's gone. You replay the last conversation, searching for inconsistencies. You recall her final look, trying to decode the message. You reanalyze the timeline, hoping to pinpoint the fracture. But you don't realize that the fracture was always there. It was in your voice when it lacked tremble. It was in your eyes when they avoided hers. It was in your embrace when it felt scripted. You were never truly with her. You were with the idea of her, and ideas don't love you back. You think, therefore you are. But she needed a man who feels, therefore he lives. She walked away slowly, not with rage, not with blame, but with a quiet sadness that only women know, the sadness of being seen entirely and still never felt. And you let her go. You let her go because you couldn't prove she was worth staying for. Because worth, for you, is calculated. And she was not a calculation. She was a chaos, a mystery, a storm. You sit now with your books, your notes, your diagrams. You can explain everything, except why her absence hurts more than her presence ever did. And that, too, confuses you, because the pain was not supposed to exist, not in a system, not in a rational world, but it does. It grows. It breathes. It wakes you up at night and asks questions that don't have answers. Questions like, why didn't I speak honestly? Why did I need to understand her instead of need her? Why was I so afraid to be confused? The mirror remains untouched, clean, empty. You look into it. You see yourself, alone, thinking, always thinking. And now, even that no longer brings comfort, because you realize the mirror was never a window, it was a wall. You were taught to trust reason, not as a tool, but as a god. It was supposed to rescue you from the disorder of the world, from the trembling of the body, from the mutiny of the heart. You were told that if you could think clearly, you would suffer less. That logic was a light through the fog of longing. That clarity was safer than closeness. So you built a temple for your mind, clean, austere, without doors, and called it protection. But now you live in that temple alone, and you've forgotten how to leave it. She once sat across from you and asked, "What are you feeling?" And you paused, not because you were overwhelmed, but because you were empty. You reached inside and found only echoes of what you were supposed to feel. Desire became an argument. Anger became a glitch. Love became a hypothesis. You could describe the shape of your longing, but not the weight. You could diagram your wounds, but not bleed. Everything you felt had to pass through interpretation before it could reach the world, and by then, it was already dead. You wanted to be good, to do it right. You rehearsed conversations like proofs. You studied behavior like syntax. You treated her heart like a grammar lesson, avoiding contradiction, maintaining structure, predicting her reactions like equations. But feelings aren't syntax. They break, they disobey. And she didn't want perfection. She wanted truth, not your version of truth, the one without tremor, without risk, without vulnerability, but the kind that trembles on the edge of not knowing. You don't trust what you cannot name. You do not trust touch because it bypasses the mind. You do not trust tears because they erupt without permission. You do not trust silence because it cannot be categorized. So you fill the spaces with language, always more language. You narrate the room while forgetting to enter it. You label her size before you hold her hand. You offer explanations when all she wanted was your attention. She once cried in front of you and you responded with analysis, not cruelty, not malice, just the only tool you knew. You tried to trace the origin of her pain, to understand its structure, to name its cause. And in doing so, you missed the only thing she needed, that you feel it with her, that you descend from your tower and sit beside her in the rubble. But you couldn't, not because you didn't care, because you didn't know how. Your mind, once a sanctuary, has become a labyrinth. You wander its corridors endlessly, asking questions with no answers. You seek proof for feelings that are not logical. You distrust the irrational, even when it offers you warmth. You filter every encounter through a mechanism built to avoid pain, and in doing so, avoid joy too. You ask, do I love her instead of letting your chest speak? You ask, is this right instead of letting the moment unfold? You live in a constant state of preemption, always anticipating, always bracing, never surrendering. And yet, you are tired, not of thinking, but of only thinking, of being the man who watches himself live without ever touching the soil. You have become your own echo, your own spectator. You speak to others, but always through the veil of reason. You offer answers, but they taste of paper. And in the night, when reason sleeps, something else stirs in you. A hunger, a grief, a memory that was never named. She told you once that being with you felt like holding smoke, that every time she thought she had touched your soul, it slipped through her fingers, that your affection felt rehearsed, that your kindness felt premeditated, and you resented her because you had tried so hard to be right, to be thoughtful, to be exact. But she wasn't asking for exactness. She was asking for chaos, for the unpredictable, for the real. The real terrifies you because it lives in the body, in the flesh, in the irrational rhythm of heartbeats and glances and touches that mean nothing but change everything. The real cannot be dissected. The real is not a conclusion, it is a wound, a fire, a fall. And you were taught never to fall. You told yourself that love must be earned through virtue, through control, through understanding, but love, as it turns out, doesn't need understanding. It needs presence. It needs surrender. It needs a man who is willing to not know and still remain. You couldn't. You turned love into a project, into a theory. And when it resisted definition, you withdrew, back into the mind, back into the safe, cold corridors of logic. She waited for you to return, not physically, existentially. She waited for the day you would choose feeling over knowing, chaos over safety, her over yourself. But that day never came. You kept building your labyrinth, adding mirrors, sharpening your certainty. And by the time you realized you were lost, she had already disappeared beyond the walls. You thought you had loved her, but you had only thought about loving her. You thought you had opened up, but you had only explained. You thought you had shared your soul, but you had only offered a map with no territory. Now you wander the ruins of your certainty, You recite the theorems, you remember the diagrams, but they bring no comfort, because the body you ignored aches, the heart you silenced howls, and the woman you measured now exists only as a question you can't answer. You hear her name in dreams, not spoken, just felt, like heat from a fire you refuse to stand close to. You wake with her absence wrapped around your chest, and for the first time, you do not analyze it, you just feel it, and you weep. Not for her, not even for love. You weep for the man you could have been had you trusted the dark, because you realize now thought without flesh is a ghost, and you have been haunting your own life. She is not coming back, not because she doesn't care, but because she can no longer reach you. You are buried in structures, in conclusions, in the cathedral of your disembodied mind, and somewhere deep in that cold cathedral, there is still a child you once were before reason ruled you, a boy who reached out with trembling hands, who didn't know the words, who didn't need them, who just wanted to be held. You left him behind, and now, even you don't know the way back. You sit across from a memory, and it does not speak. It has her shape, but not her voice. It holds her eyes, but not their weight. You've reconstructed her from fragments, gestures stored like artifacts, sentences filed like formulas, and yet she is still missing. You touch her in your thoughts, again and again, but your hand meets only reflection, a spectre, a copy, a perfect replica without breath, because thought is not touch, memory is not presence, and you, the man of perfect recollection, are still unable to bring her back. You believed your mind could preserve what your body refused to feel. You thought that to understand her completely was to possess her eternally. But understanding is not possession. It is erasure when misused. You traded the mess of real love for the illusion of clarity, and now you wander through your own mind like a ghost in an abandoned cathedral, arms outstretched, seeking a woman who once reached for you with warmth and received only precision. She once laid her head on your shoulder and said nothing. You remember the exact position of her neck, the rhythm of her breath, the pressure of her body against yours. But you don't remember what it meant, because in that moment, you were cataloging, you were storing data, you were not surrendering. She was there to rest, you were there to remember. And that was the first death. She tried to break you open, not violently, gently. She left traces of herself in your books. She drew little figures in your margins. She interrupted your thoughts with her laughter. She leaned into you during silence, waiting for you to lean back. But you always leaned inward instead, into yourself, into thought, into theory. And she grew colder each time, not because she stopped caring, but because she began to feel alone in a room where she was not. You were always almost there, almost listening, almost vulnerable, almost warm. But almost is the cruelty of men who mistake attention for presence, and you prided yourself on attention. You remembered her preferences. You recalled her childhood stories. You even cited her pain with reverence. But she did not want to be remembered. She wanted to be felt. She wanted to be held without being dissected. She wanted her sorrow to be heard without being diagnosed. But you were too afraid, not of her pain, but of your own inability to control it. Control, that is the axis upon which your world turns, the spine of your certainty. You have always believed that if you lose control, you lose yourself. That to not understand is to be helpless. That to be helpless is to be devoured. So you fortified your mind against emotion. You filtered every glance, every kiss, every tear through the grid of comprehension. And in doing so, you lost what could never be understood, only shared. You think now of the last time she cried in front of you. The image returns vividly, the exact arrangement of her hair, the tremble in her left hand, the way her mascara smudged like charcoal down her cheek. But you cannot remember what she felt. Not really. You remember how it looked, not how it ached, because you were still analyzing. Even then, you asked what triggered it. You offered interpretations, you offered distance, but not your heart. Never your heart. And so she left, not in rage, but in quiet. The kind of quiet that only those who have begged without words know. She didn't slam the door. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. You had already made her disappear long before she walked away. Now, you revisit the places you went together. Not physically, conceptually. You trace the cafes, the walks, the dim conversations under amber lights. And you try to find where it went wrong. You search for the flaw in the logic. But there is no flaw. There is only absence. A vast, echoing space where love once tried to grow and was met with glass. You believed that to love her was to know her, but she didn't want to be known. She wanted to be felt through. She wanted a man who would lose himself just for a moment in the chaos of her. But you never allowed yourself to be lost. You charted every contour. You mapped every response. You drew borders around intimacy and called it safety. But safety is not love. Safety is a coffin when it becomes a cage for feeling. Now, in the silence, you finally begin to sense what she meant, not through thought, but through ache, a slow, unwelcome ache in your chest. It arrives not as an idea, but as pressure. The mind resists it. The mind calls it weakness. The mind wants to file it into categories, but the ache will not yield. It grows. It pulses. It becomes real. And for the first time, you do not run from it. This is not redemption. It is not transformation. It is not healing. It is simply the belated consequence of disembodied living. The ghost who tries to touch and finds nothing but glass. You open a drawer and find her handwriting. It's not a letter, just a note she left once. Folded between pages. Don't think so hard. Just be with me. You stare at it. The ink has faded. The page smells of time. You run your fingers over the words, hoping that touch might do what thought never could. But it's too late. The note is not her. The moment is gone. And you feel it now, not with clarity, but with grief. You want to go back, not to change her, but to change you. To answer her silence with silence of your own, not the silence of calculation, but the silence of shared breath. You want to put down the book. You want to say nothing. You want to sit with her in the tremble, in the unsolved, in the raw. But want is not enough. Not now. Want is a ghost, too. You look at your hands. They shake. Not from age, not from fear, from sorrow, because they have reached for so many things: truth, logic, certainty, and missed the only thing that mattered: connection. She will not return. She has become a woman of warmth, somewhere else, with someone who does not dissect her sighs, with someone who listens without a filter. She does not need to be understood anymore. She only needs to be known in the way only the body can know another body, without theory, without distance, without precondition. And you, philosopher of the disembodied, must now live with your legacy, not the books, not the brilliance, but the cold, the rooms where no one stays, the bed that remembers touch only as pressure, the mind that replays her voice but cannot recall its tone. You must live in the clarity you chose and bear the cost of never once being confused enough to fall in love. You are no longer sure who you are. The mirror does not respond. It only reflects. It only shows the man who once thought his way out of feeling, and now, in the late hours, would give anything to feel his way out of thought. Somewhere, a woman laughs and the sound never reaches you. It crosses no distance, disturbs no mirror, leaves no trace. But still, you hear it, not with your ears, but with the wound thought cannot close. You reach for it in the dark, and your hand finds only the air between syllables, the emptiness that once held her breath. No one is watching you now. There is no theory left to finish, no argument to win, only the ache of having been precise where you should have been present. Somewhere, she sleeps beside someone who never needed to understand her. And you, silent, brilliant, alone, whisper to yourself, "I think, therefore I am." But the echo that returns is softer than breath, and still, she never touched me.